Our countries and the Arab countries of the Gulf are facing aggression from Iran. We know that you have a special strategic relationship with Iran. Therefore, we hope that Russia will play a greater role and exert pressure on Iran to stop the aggression against our countries. Did you condemn what the United States and Israel started doing? Did you condemn the death of 170 schoolgirls? We also cannot accept a logic according to which Iran's actions are deemed unacceptable while everything the United States and Israel are doing is beyond discussion. Our countries and the Arab countries of the Gulf are facing aggression from Iran. It poses a threat to our civilian infrastructure. Over the past week, many people have been killed. We know that you have a special strategic relationship with Iran. Therefore, we hope that Russia will play a greater role and exert pressure on Iran to stop the aggression against our countries. You said everyone knows our countries are not parties to this conflict. We did not go after Iran. I would like to convey a message from our countries that Russia has stronger positions on this issue and can help put an end to the aggression against our countries. We also have strategic relations with Russia, and we would like to increase pressure on Iran in order to bring this aggression to an immediate end. This would also help stop the conflict across the region. The group of Arab states on whose behalf you are speaking did issue warnings indeed. Many of the Arab monarchies publicly stated that matters should not be taken to military solution and that they would not make their airspace available for use. But when everything began despite your repeated calls to the United States and Israel, did you condemn what the United States and Israel started doing? Did you condemn the death of 170 schoolgirls? I believe we should adopt a single position. We are against the suffering of the Gulf countries on whose behalf you are speaking. We believe this does not provide our Arab colleagues with any military advantage. It is highly doubtful that Iran gains anything politically from this. It's quite the opposite, in fact. But we also cannot accept a logic according to which Iran's actions are deemed unacceptable while everything the United States and Israel are doing is beyond discussion. Do you see my point? It's obvious, and it lies on the surface that we are calling for an immediate cessation of the aggression. We would be sincerely grateful to the Gulf Cooperation Council and to all the countries represented here if you would add your voices to this call. Everything that is happening is caused by. One might say Iran reacted in a way that no one expected. I agree with that. A country was subjected to a treacherous attack amid ongoing talks. They had agreed to continue talking. I spoke with Foreign Minister of Oman Bad bin Hamad Al Busaidi. He was shocked to see the events take that turn at a moment when, in his assessment, solutions had been identified. So, yes, we stand in solidarity with all the Gulf countries suffering from what is happening. We call for a united front in favor of ending this war. Simply saying that Iran has no right to do anything effectively means openly encouraging the United States and Israel to continue what they are doing. That makes no sense. Let us come together and call for ending all hostilities, beginning with a complete moratorium on attacks that lead to civilian casualties and the destruction of civilian infrastructure. As is happening in many Arab countries, we are observing how the global economy is losing, at least for some considerable period, one of the main engines of its growth, and how an oil refinery is being destroyed. Seeing all of that is terrible. I have heard that your countries, I believe even Bahrain, are planning to submit a resolution in the UN Security Council along the lines you mentioned. It would condemn Iran's aggression without saying a word about what the United States and Israel are doing. This will only divide countries. I'm sure the Americans will seize upon such an initiative. It fully corresponds to their logic, which is that this regime that it has no right to exist must be finished off. In 2025, the Americans submitted to the UN Security Council a resolution on Ukraine that simply called for the conflict to be ended as soon as possible. There were some additional points, but that was the key message. Let us adopt the same kind of the UN Security Council resolution. We would fully support it. I think that would be fair.
Господин министр, вы подчеркнули вызовы.
Mr. Minister, you noted the challenges created by escalation in the Gulf region. We thank you for your solidarity and trust, because many casualties are now being documented in the countries of the region, the Gulf countries. Thank you for expressing condolences to the victims. Mr. Minister, you also spoke about Russia's concept of collective security in the Gulf area. It was advanced several years ago and has been discussed over the past few years to be further expanded. This initiative was drafted in a comprehensive manner and concerns not only the buildup of military power in the Gulf, but also energy security and security in other areas. Mr. Minister, could you tell us more about this concept? Is there still an opportunity to return to it and implement its measures?
You are absolutely right. This has been discussed for many years now. We set up what's known as Track 2 events, hoping it would help prepare for official intergovernmental contacts, at least beginning with experts. Our research institutes met several times, including quite recently. Since the interest is there and the issue is becoming increasingly relevant, I will ask my colleagues to circulate materials capturing the essence of our proposal as well as additional materials showing the reactions of the participants of these research conferences. The core idea is very simple. I'd rather not even mention the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which has become a term of abuse in some political science circles. However, back then the idea was roughly the same as at the beginning of the Helsinki process, to come together and discuss existing problems. Each participating country would set out the threats or the risks to its security as it sees them. Then we could begin with an agreement on transparency in military activities. Transparency and perhaps limitations on the number of exercises that each country along the Gulf Coast conducts. That would include mutual visits by military personnel and joint economic and trade projects. We will circulate detailed materials. Unfortunately, we are far from that now. Our US colleagues in Israel, even more so, are publicly stating that this regime is illegitimate. That is their judgment, which is directly opposite to the opinion of all UN members. The government of the Islamic Republic of Iran is a full member of the UN. All its rights must be respected, including the right to chart their own destiny, so that no one decides on behalf of the Iranian people. Some American politicians are saying they killed everyone there, almost 50 people, and there's no one left who could immediately step up and lead the country, so let the Iranian people decide. This hardly merits comment. They are trying to decide on behalf of the Iranian people. I very much hope the bloodshed will end and that it will not end with the preservation of this approach, which essentially amounts to saying that the Iranian government and the Iranian system, organization, and state have no right to exist. Who granted this right? There is a small chance that this will end with an understanding of the futility of such reckless adventures in the future, and with the realization that agreements must be reached that are durable, based on mutual respect and on the principle of indivisible security. There's always a chance. At this point it is extremely slim. But we will not abandon our efforts to promote this concept. As we say in Russia, dripping water can wear away a rock.
I have two questions. First question. President Vladimir Putin has officially announced the allocation of $1 billion for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. Nevertheless, Russia is not a participant in the Board of Peace. My second question is the following. Given the events unfolding in the Persian Gulf, we fear that people will forget the situation in Palestine. The same situation continues in Gaza. The Palestinian National Authority is being denied the right to return to Gaza. For 2 months, we have been stuck in Egypt. 55% of the territory of the Gaza Strip is occupied. The Israelis control virtually everything. At the same time, the confiscation of land continues in the West Bank. The policy aimed at ceding the West Bank to Israel continues. Where is the international community? Where is the UN? In your opinion, in which direction are we heading?
Let me begin with the second question, because it is the fundamental one. We have been committed to a two-state solution since 1988, when the Soviet Union recognized the state of Palestine. Since then, a fully accredited embassy has been operational here, and we maintain full diplomatic relations. This step was also taken with due regard for the historical circumstances. Those circumstances are that the Soviet Union was one of the principal initiators of the UN resolution on the creation of two states, a Palestinian state and a Jewish state. One can re-read the resolution adopted by the General Assembly. It follows very clearly from that text that the two were interlinked. However, only the State of Israel came into being, which the Soviet Union immediately recognized. The predecessors of today's Palestinian politicians. It is a long story, but for those who are interested, I recommend reading about how it happened in 1948 that a Palestinian state was not proclaimed. One should probably look for the reasons for that among the Palestinian politicians of that time. A war was unleashed. Then there were several more wars, 1967, 1973. With each successive conflict, the territory under the control of the Palestinian National Authority shrank. Nevertheless, the official position of all the countries represented here remains the creation of a Palestinian state within the 1967 borders, with its capital in East Jerusalem and with the right of return for refugees. We reiterate this constantly. You have made a perfectly valid point. But if we follow your own line of reasoning and look at the map of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, it is difficult to envisage how a Palestinian state can be created on the territory that remains unoccupied by Israel. President Donald Trump's plan concerns only the Gaza Strip. That is what was announced. It was approved by the UN Security Council in the autumn of 2025, although it did not contain a single word about a Palestinian state. It contained not a single word about the resolutions adopted by the United Nations concerning the Palestinian problem, the Gaza Strip, or the West Bank. It contained not a single word about the West Bank at all, in any context whatsoever. Together with our Chinese friends, we drew the attention of the American authors of the resolution to this. They refused to consider any amendments. It was to be their way or nothing. Only the Board of Peace, which would run everything under the chairmanship of President Donald Trump. Our Chinese colleagues and we were puzzled. What were we to do? How could we approve a resolution on an issue that has been at the center of UN attention for decades, without even mentioning the position of the United Nations itself? To be perfectly honest, we thought we should block such a resolution. But our Palestinian friends and virtually all the Arab delegations in New York strongly urged us not to veto it. In the end, China and Russia abstained in the vote. But our official position remains that there must be a Palestinian state. The difficulty now is that this position is being publicly and officially rejected by Israel. We hear and we see Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stating that there will be no Palestinian state. We can see an unprecedented number of settlements being approved in the West Bank, essentially severing its ties with East Jerusalem. Meanwhile, we hear Israeli officials say that 2 or 3 municipalities for Palestinians in the West Bank would be sufficient. I do not want to create the impression that we are always right and that others always make mistakes. But we recognized the state of Palestine back in 1988. At that time, I assure you, if all or most other states had taken the same position, the prospect of a Palestinian state would not have seemed like a fantasy. Along with East Jerusalem and many other elements that form the foundation of a settlement, the principles of which were approved by the UN General Assembly and Security Council in June 2025. I heard French President Emmanuel Macron suddenly say that he was concerned about what was happening in the Gaza Strip. He said that in 3 months, at the UN General Assembly, they would recognize Palestine. First of all, why has such a decision not been made during all these decades? And second, if in June 2025 you decided that you would recognize Palestine, why wait until September? I will tell you why. They hoped that by September 2025 the issue would simply disappear, and there would be nothing left to recognize. Other Western countries followed this line. That is why we supported Donald Trump's plan, primarily because it called for an end to violence on both sides and was acceptable to both sides. The number of civilian casualties has dropped significantly, although they do occur. Violations continue. We see violations of the principles on which Israel committed to withdrawing from the Gaza Strip. The same is happening in southern Lebanon, where the earlier reached agreements are not being observed. It is announced that Hamas must be destroyed in all its guises, which goes somewhat against Donald Trump's plan to disarm Hamas. The disarmament process is being interpreted in a very specific way that we see many steps that, little by little, justify actions that run counter to the goals proclaimed in Donald Trump's plan. However, we remain committed to returning the Gaza Strip to the Palestinians so that they can rebuild it. The $1 billion that President Putin announced will be allocated from our frozen sovereign assets in the United States. We specifically notified the Americans about this in an official note, is intended for building housing, social facilities, the restoration of civilian infrastructure, for addressing all the issues that would allow Palestinians to return. We did not ask to use these funds for any other purposes. Following President Putin's decision, we sent an official note to our American colleagues. So far there has been no response. We have reminded them several times, but they have still not replied. We only hear. As far as I know, they have stopped talking about the Middle Eastern Riviera. There is talk about the need to restore these lands, but better still, to create some sort of resort there. I believe this would be disrespectful to the Palestinians. They suggest resettling them practically all over the world, from Indonesia to Somalia. It is up to the Palestinians themselves to decide. But no one has the right to undermine or challenge their right to their own land. That is absolutely clear. At that meeting that was held not long ago, an allocation of another $10 or $15 billion was announced. The Gaza Strip needs to be rebuilt, and rebuilt in such a way that would guarantee the Palestinians' right to return to this land. I have no doubt about that. With regard to Palestinian refugees, no one is talking today about their long-recognized right to return. If the indigenous people of the Gaza Strip are deprived of this right now, it would be a disgrace and a shame for the United Nations and for any other structures created alongside the UN to address the problems of Gaza and Palestine as a whole. I would like to express the position of the Arab states, and in particular the Arab League, which was founded to maintain and ensure peace in our region. That is why it cares for its member countries. We issued a statement condemning Iran's actions against Arab states, because this is a major concern. We called on all states, and we also call on you to play a greater role and take action to stop this insane war, not only against Arab states, not only against Iran, but against the entire world. This threatens peace and security everywhere. It is vital that it does not spiral into a third world war. That we rely on you as a steadfast friend of all Arab states. Russia is a member of the UN Security Council. You have good relations with Iran, with the Arab countries, and with the United States. Therefore, we once again call on you to take action. Perhaps together with Oman, which plays a major role in this and could help bring this issue to the negotiating table. And my second question concerns the negotiations with Ukraine. I have heard little about them recently, but I would like your assessment of the recent trilateral negotiations involving Ukraine and the United States. Information has recently appeared in the press and online about a dirty bomb that the West supposedly wants to give to Ukraine. Does this influence your approach to the negotiations? On your first question, I can only repeat what I already said in response to the distinguished ambassador of Bahrain. You are calling on us to stop this, given our relations with Iran, with the Arab states, and with the United States. My answer is, we want to stop it. But let us do it together. That will require more than simply saying, Iran must stop. It will require looking at the whole picture. As I said earlier. Why not push for a resolution in the UN Security Council? Perhaps even at the General Assembly too, calling for an immediate end to this conflict. A logical first step could be to demand an end to actions that harm civilians and infrastructure. But this can only be done collectively. Otherwise, it looks like we are condemning one side while turning a blind eye to the other. The West has a habit of cancelling history. We saw this in full force with Ukraine, when a coup took place there in February 2014. And let's not forget, it happened the very morning after Germany, France, and Poland had acted as guarantors of a settlement agreement between the president and the opposition. That agreement was meant to lead to early presidential elections. Everyone calmed down. And the next morning, the opposition tore it up. France, Germany, and Poland simply swallowed it. A Nazi regime came to power. Its first proclamation was to abolish the status of the Russian language. Its second step was to send armed militants to storm the building of the Supreme Council of Crimea, which had refused to recognize the legitimacy of this bloody coup. Then, with the help of our troops, we have always had a naval base in Crimea. Crimea held a referendum and reunited with Russia. The West raised a hue and cry. And ever since, 4 years, when we were still talking, they said, well, you annexed Crimea, and that started the Ukrainian crisis and this whole war. We ask, but what about the coup? Because Crimea voted in a referendum to join Russia in protest against the coup. And their response? No, you annexed it. History, which is fundamental to understanding the root causes of any situation, gets erased. The same thing is happening here. But we cannot cancel June 2025, when, in the midst of negotiations, the first aggression against Iran took place. US President Donald Trump then announced that all nuclear facilities had been destroyed. And here I should say, the role of the IAEA and its secretariat is not entirely clear to us. Because never, nowhere, not once, in any agency report, has there been even a hint of suspicion that Iran might have a nuclear bomb. Yes, there have been findings that Iran had a significant amount of enriched uranium, enriched to levels higher than necessary for energy production. But no one mentions that Iran only began increasing enrichment after the United States withdrew from the agreement regulating the Iranian nuclear program in 2018. While that agreement was in force, and it was unanimously approved by the UN Security Council, Iran strictly observed all the restrictions it imposed. But as soon as the United States pulled out, and Europe cowardly stayed silent, offering not even a word of protest, Iran waited. And then, in reaction, partly to try to shake the conscience of its Western colleagues who had, with their own hands, destroyed a UN Security Council resolution, it began to increase enrichment. That, of course, did nothing to enhance the cause of peace. But it was, nonetheless, justified. And when those actions were condemned, it was yet another attempt to cancel history. To cancel out the part about the United States withdrawing, without explanation, from an agreement that placed restrictions on Iran, restrictions that Iran was strictly complying with. There was another case, you know, when the IAEA reviewed the Director General's report in 2025. The wording it contained was quite ambiguous. After that, the UK, France and Germany submitted a resolution in which they exploited this ambiguous wording to push through a decision to renew the then expired sanctions against Iran. They embarked on this campaign first within the IAEA, and later in the UN Security Council. This amounted to manipulating international law and scorning at facts, and constituted a blatant attempt to justify their own actions while inflicting punishment on Iran which did nothing to deserve it. This should not surprise anyone who knows what the Europeans represent, but keep demonstrating new qualities and facets, leaving us amazed every time. When asked what is going on within the IAEA, the agency's Director General Rafael Grossi said that his preceding report suggested that until Iran assists the IAEA in addressing unresolved matters dealing with the safeguards, the agency would not be able to assert that Iran's nuclear program has an exclusively peaceful nature. Do you know what he meant when he talked about Iran assisting the IAEA in addressing the unresolved matters dealing with the safeguards? The agency insisted on accessing facilities involved in the nuclear program which were targeted by the bombing carried out by the United States in June 2025. They insisted on this point until recently. Iran, as well as Russia, by the way, asked the IAEA how these facilities could be bombed if they were under the IAEA's control and covered by its safeguards. This is something which is strictly prohibited. Could the IAEA share its point of view on this illegal act? It did not fly. All the IAEA said was that they needed to access these sites. You see? They buried the story about how it all started. Controlled by the IAEA, these facilities had to benefit from total immunity any way you look at it, but nevertheless they were targeted in a bombing attack. But the agency remained silent. All it said consisted of asking to go there to see what was left and what was destroyed. This is an unprofessional, politics-driven approach. I am saying this to demonstrate that when the IAEA releases its latest reports, they are also trying to sweep this story under the carpet. This new aggression we are witnessing today follows a similar pattern. There is an effort to cancel everything related to the talks, comments, and efforts by Iran, as well as countries which tried offering their good offices, including the Russian Federation. President Vladimir Putin has offered to act as a mediator many times in recent months when receiving representatives of the United States, Iran, and Israel. Had everyone accepted this mediation, this would have addressed suspicions regarding the Islamic Republic of Iran's relatively big stockpiles of highly enriched uranium. Everyone knows this well. All these concerns could have been lifted a long time ago. But they cancelled this whole story, including the conversations we had with the United States, as well as with Israel. All they said was that the Ayatollah would have killed the President of the United States had it not been the other way around. That was it. From that point, this narrative started to dominate live coverage by casting the country as a pariah which does not have the right to exist. They also talked about once again activating the Kurdish factor, and many other things. For this reason, while expressing our solidarity with the Arab countries from the GCC, we also express our solidarity with Iran. For all these years, we have been trying to facilitate the processes which emerged and have been gaining traction in this region for bringing relations between Iran and Arab countries back to normal. We did everything to assist these efforts. In fact, we have already mentioned our concept today. But others, those who are now bombing Iran, wanted to achieve the opposite result. But let me go back to what I said in the beginning about the divide and rule, divide et impera, principle, about pitching various sides against one another and then letting passion spiral out of control. This was designed to make those who suffered from this divide and rule policy raise their voice and demand that Iran, in this particular case, be condemned. I suggest that we all speak out in a single voice to stop all these developments. The UN Security Council must adopt a straightforward and concise one-page resolution. We are ready to work with our friends in New York to draft it so that we can see what the response will be.